Third, the Dutch also, who have the best way of guiding of kings of any that ever had to do with them, witness their having so many of them in chains, now in Batavia in the East Indies, are not wanting for their part to furnish us with examples. When the King of Spain would not condescend to govern them according to their ancient laws, and rule for the good of the people, they declared him to be fallen from the Signory of the Netherlands, and so erected themselves into a flourishing commonwealth. It will not be amiss to transcribe some of the words of the Edict of the States General to this purpose. It is well known, say they, quote, that a prince and lord of a country is ordained by God to be sovereign and head over his subjects, to preserve and defend them from all injuries, force, and violence. And that if the prince therefore faileth therein, and instead of preserving his subjects doth outrage and oppress them, depriveth them of their privileges and ancient customs, commandeth them, and will be served of them as slaves, they are no longer bound to respect him as their sovereign lord, but to esteem of him as a tyrant. Neither are they bound to acknowledge him as their prince, but may abandon him." Unquote. And with this agrees the answer William, Prince of Orange, to the Edict of Proscription, published against him by Philip II. "There is," says he, quote, "a reciprocal bond betwixt the lord and his vassal, so that if the lord break the oath which he hath made unto his vassal, the vassal is discharged of the oath made unto his lord." Unquote. This was the very argument of the poor suffering people of Scotland, whereupon they disowned the authority of Charles II. Number 4. The monarchy of France is very absolute, yet there also the state hath taken order with their tyrants. Not only have we many instances of resistance made against them, but also of disowning, disabling, and invalidating their pretended authority, and repressing their tyranny. So was the two Childericae served, so also Sybertus, Dagobertus, and Lodowick II, kings of France. Fifthly, the great body of Germany moves very slowly, and is inured to bear great burdens. Yet there also we find Joanna of Austria, mother of Charles V, was put to perpetual imprisonment, which example is adduced by the Earl of Morton in his discourse to the Queen of England, whereof I shall rehearse a part before, vindicating the deposing and disowning Queen Mary of Scotland. Quote, "If, saith he, we compare her with Joanna of Austria, what did that poor wretch commit, but that she could not want a little lustful pleasure as a remedy necessary for her age? And yet, poor creature, she suffered that punishment, of which our dame, convicted of most grievous crimes, now complains." Unquote. Buchanan's History of Scotland, Book 20, page 748. The Duke of Saxon, the Landgrave of Hesse, and the magistrates of Magdeburg joined in a war against her son, Charles V, and drew up a conclusion by resolution of lawyers, wherein are these words, quote, "Neither are we bound to him by any other reason than if he keep the conditions on which he was created emperor. By the laws themselves it is provided that the superior magistrate shall not infringe the right on the inferior, and if the superior magistrate exceed the limits of his power and command that which is wicked, not only we need not obey him, but if he offer force, we may resist him." Unquote. Which opinion is confirmed by some of the greatest lawyers and even some who are patrons of tyranny. Grotius, none of the greatest enemies of tyrants, De Jure Belli, Lib 1, Chapter 4, page 11, saith out of Barclayus, and with him, that the king doth lose his power when he seeketh the destruction of his subjects. It was upon the account of the tyranny of that bloody house of Austria over the Helvetians that they shook off the rule and government of that people, and established themselves into a republic. And at this present time, upon the same accounts, the tyranny and treachery of this imperial magistracy, the Hungarians have essayed to maintain and justify a revolt in disowning the emperor now for several years. Number 6. Poland is an elective kingdom, and so cannot but be fertile of many instances of casting off tyrants. Henricus Valsius, disowning for fleeing, and Sigismundus for violating his faith to the states, may suffice. Lex Rex, question 24, page 217, Also, number 7, in Denmark, we find Christernus, their king, was for his intolerable cruelty put from the kingdom, he and all his posterity, and after 20 years did end his life in prison. 8th, in Sweden, within the compass of 1 century, the people disposed and banished the 2 Christerns, and dethroned and imprisoned Ericus for their oppressions and tyranny, and for pursuing the destruction of their subjects. 9. The Portuguese, not many years ago, laid aside and confined Alphonsus, their king, for his rapiness and murders. 10th, some dukes of Venice have been so disowned by these commonwealth's men that, laying aside their royal honors as private men, they have spent their days in monasteries. Buchanan, De Jure Regina Epud Scatos. 11th, if we will resolve the old Roman histories, we shall find no small store of such examples, both in the time of their kings, consuls, and emperors. Their 7th king, Tarquinius Superbus, was removed by the people for his evident usurpation. Saith Livius, quote, that is, for he had nothing for a right to the government, but mere force, and got the rule neither by the people's consent and choice, nor by the authority of the senators, unquote. So afterwards the empire was taken from Vitellius, Heliogabalus, Maximinus, Didius, Julianus, Lex Rex, ubi supra. 12th. But it will be said, can there be any instances of the primitive Christians adduced? Did ever they, while groaning under the most insupportable tyranny of their persecuting emperors, disown their authority or suffer for not owning it? To this I answer, first, what they did or did not of this kind is not of moment to inquire, seeing their practice and example under such disadvantages can neither be known exactly, nor what is known of it be accommodated to our case. For, first, they were never forced to give their judgment, neither was the question ever put to them whether they owned their authority or not. If they transgressed the laws, they were liable to the punishment. They craved no more of them. Secondly, they confessed themselves to be strangers, that had no establishments by law, and therefore they behooved to be passively subject, when in no capacity to resist. There was no more required of them. Yet, Lex Rex, question 35, page 371, cites Theodoret affirming, quote, then evil men reigned through the unmanliness of the subjects, unquote. Thirdly, their examples are not imitable in all things. They were against resistance, which we doubt not to prove is lawful against tyrannical violence. Many of them refused to flee from the fury of persecutors. They ran to martyrdom, when neither cited nor accused, and to obtain the crown thereof they willingly yielded up their lives and liberties also to the rage of tyrants. We cannot be obliged to all these. Number 2. Yet we find some examples not altogether unapplicable to this purpose. When Baruch Bach, the pretended king of the Jews, after the destruction of Jerusalem, set himself as king in Bitter, a city in Arabia, the Christians that were in his precincts refused to own him as king, which was one great cause of his persecuting them. It is true he persecuted them also for other things, as for their not denying Christ. So are we persecuted for many other things than for our simple disowning of the king. Yet this is reckoned as a distinct cause of their suffering by Mr. Meade on his Revelation, Part 1, page 43, G's Magist Origin, Chapter 10, Section 7, page 361. The same last cited author shows that when Albinius Niger Cassius successively usurped the empire, having none of them any legal investiture, the Christians declined the recognition of their claim and would not own them. And that upon this, Tertullian says, that is, the Christians could never be found to be Albinians or Nigrians or Cassians, meaning they were never owners of these men or magistrates. And so may we say, we may be ashamed to be found among the Charlites and Jacobites of these times. Not unlike is the passage of Ambrose, who, in favors of Valentinian, the rightful governor, contested against Maximus, the tyrant, and not only disowned him, but excommunicated him, for which he was threatened with death. And yet it is observable that when Maximus offered to interpose his power in defense of Ambrose, that he might not be banished by Justinian, the empress, he would not accept of the help of Maximus, whose power he disallowed and disowned. Whence I observe that it is not without a precedent for a minister to disown a tyrant, to refuse favor from him, yea, and to excommunicate him, yea, even without the concurrence of his fainting brethren, for all which some of our faithful ministers have been much condemned in this day, especially Mr. Donald Cargill for excommunicating Charles II and James, Duke of York, as if such a thing had never been done before, whereas we see what Ambrose did to Maximus, and this same faithful minister, Ambrosius, minister at Milan in Italy, did also hold out of the assembly of the Christians Theodosius, the emperor, though a most virtuous prince, for that grievous scandal committed by him against the innocent people at Thessalonica, in killing so many of them in a passionate transport. But third, since this objection of primitive Christians is much insisted on, both against this and the head of defensive arms, I shall further take notice of several distinctions that do make the difference between their case and ours very vast. Number 1. There is a great difference betwixt a prince of the common religion of his subjects, but distinct from some of them, whom yet he does not seek to entice to his religion, but gives them liberty and the benefit of the law as other subjects, which was the case of many of these primitive times sometimes. And a prince, by all means, both sole and fair, pressing to a revolt from the true, and to embrace a false religion. In this case, which is ours with a witness, it must be granted we should be wary, that we neither engage with him nor own allegiance to him, that he would withdraw us from our allegiance to God. Second, there is a great difference betwixt a prince persecuting the true religion, which only a few of his subjects here and there did profess, who in regard to their paucity were never in capacity to be looked upon as the body of the people, empowering him as their public servant, which was their case, and a prince persecuting that religion which was professed by the body of the nation when they set him up. In this latter case, men of great sense have denied he should be owned for a prince, because then he is stated against the common good. This was our case under the former king, and yet under this, though all professors be not now persecuted, the public religion and ancient Reformation is persecuted in a few, whom he intends to destroy, and in their destruction to bury it. Third, there is a difference betwixt a prince persecuting religion, publicly owned and received of his subjects, yet never approved nor confirmed by law, as it was not in the primitive times, and a prince persecuting religion ratified and established by the laws of the land, which is our case. It will seem clear to every soul, not benighted with court darkness, that he then, of course, and by law, falleth from his right in this case, because now he is not only stated against the common good, but against the very laws by which the subjects must be ruled. Then he ruleth not as a prince, to whom the law giveth his measures and bounds, but rageth as a tiger and tyrant, and ought to be carried towards as such. Fourthly, there is a difference betwixt a prince suppressing that religion established by law, which he never professed, nor gave his consent to these laws, as might be the case of some of the Arian emperors, though it be unlawful for any people to set up any mortal over them, who is not in this case bound to the good behavior. And a prince opposing and oppressing that religion, which himself hath professed, and is ratified by laws with his own consent, which was our case under the former king, who did give the most solemn ratification of them that ever was given, but afterwards most perfidiously retracted it. As also this apostate papist did sometime profess himself Protestant, and consented to the laws establishing it, and the penal statutes against papists, though now he is going about to raise all and ruin that alone valuable treasure of our nation, religion. Fifthly, there is a difference betwixt a prince consenting to laws establishing religion, which he now persecuteth, which might have been the case of Julian the Apostate, and a prince who not only consented to these laws, but who did upon these very terms and no other get and receive his crown and scepter, that he should preserve the religion as reformed, and protect as a father the professors thereof, and maintain the laws establishing it, which Yet he, perfidiously being once settled in the government, breaks, casts, cassates, and overturns, which was done by Charles, and a prince who will be bounded by the laws consented to, nor be bound to the observation of any laws whatsoever, but challenges it as his prerogative royal to be absolute above all laws, and deny all security upon terms, is free to destroy religion and liberty, and all the valuable interests of the nation, when he pleases. This is James's character.